Why do we do what we do? Why do some of our choices feel like they come out of nowhere, like there's a hidden part of us pulling the strings? Well, Freud asked those questions long before most people even thought to. He dared to dive into the hidden corners of the mind, what he called the unconscious, a place packed with desires, fears, and all kinds of stuff we're not always ready to face. Freud isn't just a name you hear in psychology class. He revolutionized the way we understand how we think, feel, and act. Thanks to him, we know that a lot of what drives us isn't exactly clear, and definitely not always conscious. In this video, we're going to explore this wild idea that your mind is full of hidden forces shaping your decisions, often without you realizing it. So, stick around. And if you're into exploring the mysteries of the mind, give this video a like, maybe hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started. Part 1. Who was Sigmund Freud? Sigmund Freud was the guy who completely shook up the way we think about, well, thinking. Born in 1856 in what's now the Czech Republic, he grew up in a family that valued curiosity and intellectual exploration. At first, Freud was all about the body. He studied medicine in Vienna and specialized in neurology, the science of the brain and nervous system, which was still in its early days back then. But Freud wasn't satisfied with just what could be seen or measured. At the end of the 19th century, psychology focused mainly on visible behavior. The idea that the mind could hide things from itself, that was radical. Freud flipped the script. He asked, what if the reasons behind our actions aren't always conscious? He introduced the idea of a divided mind, with a hidden layer he called the unconscious, where all sorts of unspoken, unseen forces operate. To explore this mysterious space, Freud developed a new method, psychoanalysis. It wasn't about brain scans or lab experiments, it was about talking. Diving into dreams, slips of the tongue, little gestures we don't even notice. He was digging into the private backstage of the mind. Of course, his ideas didn't go unnoticed. They sparked plenty of debates, especially his theories around the unconscious and concepts like the Oedipus complex. But love him or challenge him, one thing's clear. Freud opened a door into the human mind that we never closed. Thanks to him, we started seeing the mind not as a simple machine, but as a puzzle with invisible pieces shaping our emotions, our choices, and our relationships. Even today, whether you agree with all his theories or not, if you want to understand how the mind works, especially the parts you don't control, Freud is still one of the key names to know. Part 2. The Theory of the Unconscious. So, what exactly is this unconscious Freud keeps talking about? Think of it like an iceberg. The part you see above water is what you know about yourself, your conscious thoughts and decisions. But beneath the surface lies a huge, hidden mass. That's your unconscious. It's where your desires, fears, forgotten memories, and all kinds of messy stuff quietly influences what you do. Freud broke down the mind into 3 parts. The id is the raw, impulsive part. Hunger, desire, anger. It's our primitive instincts demanding instant gratification. The ego is the reasonable part. It tries to manage the id's urges while dealing with reality, kind of like a mediator. The superego is the voice of morality and rules we've learned, that inner judge telling us what's right and wrong. These 3 forces are constantly tugging at each other inside us. For example, you might feel a strong urge, that's the id, but your superego makes you feel guilty while your ego is trying to find a balance. Here's a simple example. You're invited to a party but have an exam the next day. Your id says, "Go have fun." Your superego whispers, "No, you need to study, it's important," while your ego is trying to strike a deal. "Maybe I'll stay for a bit, then head home early." Freud also shared lots of fascinating stories. He studied patients confused by their own reactions, like phobias or mental blocks, and found that often a hidden part of their unconscious was causing the trouble. Part 3. Defense mechanisms. When your mind protects you without you realizing it. Ever caught yourself reacting in a weird way without really knowing why? Like getting upset over something small or avoiding someone for no clear reason. Freud would say it's no coincidence. According to him, our unconscious doesn't just store stuff, it actively works to protect us. It uses what he called defense mechanisms. And even if we don't see them, they're at work every single day. So, what exactly are defense mechanisms? Think of them as mental shields. When a thought, feeling, or memory is too painful or disturbing, your mind handles it, usually by twisting it or hiding it. And the craziest part? It happens unconsciously. You don't choose it. It kicks in like a reflex. Here are a few of the most common ones. 1. Repression. The most famous one. You go through something too intense and poof, your mind buries it deep in the unconscious. You don't think about it anymore, but it still affects you beneath the surface. Example, you don't remember a traumatic moment from childhood, yet you still have unexplained fears. 2. Projection. You feel an unpleasant emotion, but don't want to admit it to yourself, so you project it onto someone else. Example, you're jealous, but accuse the other person of being the jealous or possessive one. It's a way to avoid facing what bothers you inside. 3. Displacement. You have an emotion, but you can't express it to the right person, so you redirect it somewhere else. Example, your boss humiliates you, you say nothing, but you come home tense and snap at your brother, your cat, or even your coffee machine. That's your anger being displaced. 4. Sublimation. This one's a noble defense mechanism. Your mind transforms a raw impulse or inner tension into something creative or useful. Example, feeling intense emotions, you channel them into music, writing, art, or your work. Freud saw this as a sign of psychological maturity. There are many others: rationalization, denial, identification, humor, and more. They all serve the same purpose: to protect you from what your mind isn't ready to face head-on. What does this look like in real life? You say, "I'm fine," when everything inside you screams otherwise. You explain a failure as bad timing, but deep down, you were scared to succeed. You say someone else is aggressive when really you're on the defensive. Not because you're lying, but because your mind is trying to shield you from a shock. And that's neither good nor bad. It's just how humans work. The key is to become aware of it, so you don't end up being controlled by your own defense mechanisms. Have you ever caught yourself reacting in a way you couldn't explain? Share a moment like that in the comments. Putting it into words is already a first step towards clarity. If what you're learning here helps you understand yourself better, hit the like button so more people can see it. Feel free to share it with a friend, the one who often wonders, why do I react like this, even when it doesn't make sense? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's next. We're just getting started. You're about to discover how much of what you experience today has roots way deeper than you ever imagined. Part 4. How childhood impacts your adult psyche. Tell me what you went through as a child, and I'll tell you why you make the choices you do today. Freud, in essence. You might think you've moved on, that your past is behind you. But for Freud, the child you once were hasn't disappeared. That child still lives deep in your unconscious, quietly shaping, often without you realizing it, your decisions, your reactions, your relationships. And the more you ignore this influence, the more it controls you. Childhood, the foundation of your psyche. Freud believed the early years of life are crucial. That's when your psychic structure is built. This invisible system managing your emotions, desires, fears, and inner rules. He wasn't just talking about formal education. He meant what you felt, absorbed, and internalized before you even had the words to express it. And in this process, several key elements leave a lasting mark on your unconscious. The Oedipus complex, a silent turning point. One of Freud's most famous and often misunderstood ideas. The Oedipus complex happens around ages 3 to 6, when a child feels a strong attachment to the parent of the opposite sex and an unconscious rivalry with the other parent. Freud didn't mean you literally wanted to date your mom or fight your dad. He described a deep, confusing emotional movement that's fundamental to development. And importantly, how you work through it. If this stage goes wrong, too much frustration, unprocessed conflicts, poorly integrated boundaries, it leaves scars. Fear of authority, constant need for validation, difficulties in romantic relationships, repeated self-sabotage without knowing why. Freud's message is, you're reenacting what you never fully understood. The stages of psychosexual development. Freud mapped out 5 stages, each focused on a different erogenous zone and inner tension to resolve. Oral, 0 to 1 year. Everything goes through the mouth. Security, closeness, dependence. Blockage here might lead to emotional dependence or eating disorders. Anal, 1 to 3 years. Control, cleanliness, autonomy. Tension can cause extreme need for control, or, on the flip side, chaos. Phallic, 3 to 6 years. Oedipus complex emerges, curiosity about sexuality, self-assertion. Latency, 6 to 12 years. Conflict cools down, the child opens up to the outside world and culture. Genital, adolescence to adulthood. Mature sexuality, integrating desires, relating to others. If a stage isn't digested well, parts of you get stuck there, acting behind the scenes. When your inner child still screams. Imagine a man who, as an adult, feels an irrational fear of abandonment. Whenever someone doesn't reply right away, he panics, imagining they don't love him anymore or that they're betraying him. On the surface, it's illogical, but tracing it back, you find that as a kid, he experienced sudden separations, a distant parent, unexplained absences. His unconscious registered this as a life-threatening danger, and though he grew up, that fear never left. See what I mean? What you feel today isn't always about what's happening now. Sometimes it's your child self still afraid, and your adult self pays the price. Why this matters? This isn't about blaming your parents. It's not about being stuck in the past. It's about taking control. Because as long as you ignore where your feelings come from, you're at their mercy. But once you shine a light on them, you regain freedom. Understanding your story is the first real step towards maturity. Is there a pattern you keep repeating without knowing why? A fear, a reaction, or a behavior that doesn't feel like you? Drop it in the comments. Just naming it is already a breakthrough. Part 5. Why do we do what we do? You think you decide, but most of the time, you just repeat. This is one of Freud's most unsettling and powerful insights. Your daily actions, your choices, habits, reactions, don't always come from conscious decisions. You believe you're in control, but there's a part of you acting in the shadows. And as long as you don't see it, it's the one calling the shots. Actions are rarely accidental. You didn't just miss that appointment. You didn't simply forget to reply. You're not always attracted to the wrong people by chance. Freud called these Freudian slips, or failed acts. For him, they're not accidents. They're signals, coded messages. You forgot because your unconscious wanted to avoid something. You sabotaged yourself because a part of you feared success. You repeat the same mistakes because you're replaying an unresolved story. It sounds harsh, but it's freeing, because what you understand, you can begin to change. Desires, conflicts, and buried memories. Freud believed our behavior results from three forces constantly pulling in different directions. Unconscious desires, often tied to childhood, sexuality, power, or recognition. Internal prohibitions, what Freud called the superego, that inner voice that judges, forbids, and makes you feel guilty. And repressed memories, too painful or troubling, buried deep, but still active. And you're like a tightrope walker. You move forward, you act, but really, you're balancing these hidden forces without always realizing it. Freud called this the dynamic of the unconscious, a cold war between your impulses, blocks, and conscious mind. Psychoanalysis, a journey inward. Freud created a method to explore these dark corners. Psychoanalysis. It's not just talking to a therapist. It's an inner investigation, a decoding. Through free associations, dreams, slips of the tongue, and memories, you trace the threads back. You begin to see what you never wanted or could see before. And bit by bit, the unconscious becomes conscious. That's when things start to change. Not by magic, but through awareness. What this means today. Even outside strict psychoanalysis, Freud's ideas shape modern psychology. Behavioral therapies. Genuine personal growth, not empty slogans, but real transformation. Emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and lasting mental health. The question isn't just, how do I change my habits? But where do these habits come from? What are they protecting? What are they hiding? Freud taught us this: understanding is already part of healing. Why do you do what you do? Maybe you procrastinate. Maybe you self-sabotage. Maybe you avoid intimacy or chase love at all costs. But look deeper. You'll often find there's a reason, a story, an origin behind it. And until you decode it, it's in the driver's seat. Ask yourself right now, what patterns do I keep repeating without understanding why? Write it down in the comments. Naming it is the first step towards clarity. And if this video helps you see what silently drives you, like it. Subscribe to keep exploring the unconscious, where psychology, philosophy, and inner transformation meet. And share it with someone who needs to hear that their mistakes aren't flaws, but messages, keys to unlocking themselves. Part 6. Critiques and Evolutions of Freudian Thinking. Freud isn't exactly a universally agreed-upon figure, and that's partly what keeps his ideas alive. He completely changed how we think about human nature, but he's also been challenged, criticized, and sometimes rightly so. To truly grasp his legacy, you need to recognize both his impact and his limits without throwing the whole thing out. Freud under fire: science versus subjectivity. One of the biggest critiques against Freud is the lack of scientific rigor. His theories, while intuitive, powerful, and insightful, weren't always backed by repeatable empirical research. Concepts like the Oedipus complex or the death drive have never been proven by measurable studies. And in a world where psychology aims to be more scientific, that's a real issue. But does that mean we should dismiss everything? No, because Freud was first and foremost an explorer of the soul, not a brain engineer. What still holds up and matters? Despite everything, some core Freudian ideas stand the test of time. The idea of an active, structured, influential unconscious. The notion that our symptoms speak and hold hidden meaning. The vital role of childhood and early experiences in shaping the self. And above all, understanding our inner contradictions as a path to freedom. These concepts continue to shape psychology, psychoanalysis, coaching, literature, film, advertising, and the arts. Freud's influence is woven into modern imagination, even when we don't realize it. A philosophy that evolves, just like you. You don't have to agree with everything, but you can draw inspiration from it to think deeper. Freudian thought is a springboard, not a cage. It invites questioning, exploration, and doubt, not blind dogma. And really, that's the heart of philosophy and psychology. Stay curious, critical, but never cynical. What about Freud's ideas strikes you as outdated or, on the contrary, still powerful? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every word, and your insights often inspire future videos. If you want psychology and philosophy to have a real place on YouTube, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, share it. Maybe it'll give someone the key to better understand themselves. Because in the end, that's what it's all about. Not being right, but getting closer to who you really are. Conclusion, wrapping up and opening the door to reflection. So, why do you do what you do? Maybe after diving into Freud's world, you're starting to see things differently. Maybe you're realizing, what if my choices, reactions, and stuck patterns aren't random, but actually make sense? Not consciously, but through the lens of the unconscious. We've discovered much of what drives us lies beneath the surface, invisible, but deeply influential. Freud taught us to listen to subtle clues, dreams, slips of the tongue, strange habits, repeated patterns. Our defense mechanisms help us cope, but can also trap us in loops. Our childhood leaves imprints, often silent but powerful. Our mistakes, forgetfulness, and self-sabotage aren't always failures. Sometimes they're coded messages. And even though psychoanalysis isn't an exact science, it gives us something incredibly valuable, a way to read our own inner world, and maybe start setting ourselves free. In the end, Freud isn't about locking us into our past. He's about giving us the tools to revisit it, reinterpret it, and choose a different path forward. So tell me, what's one thing about yourself you're starting to see with fresh eyes? A behavior, a fear, a cycle you keep repeating? Drop it in the comments, because just noticing it, that's already a step toward change. And if this video helped you name something, shine a light, or plant a useful doubt, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's ready to understand themselves a little better. Because sometimes a good question is worth more than a quick answer. Thanks for sticking around to the end, and remember, what you don't see in yourself ends up running the show. But once you shine a light on it, you take the lead back.